"Sir, this is a restricted area. Do you have a hearing problem?" The voice was sharp, laced with the brittle confidence of new authority. Lieutenant Chloe Vance stood with her hands on her hips, her pristine Navy working uniform a stark contrast to the old man before her. He stood silently at the edge of the pier, his gaze fixed on the colossal gray hull of the aircraft carrier moored at the dock, the USS Enterprise. He was ancient, his back slightly stooped, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by sun and time. He wore a faded leather jacket that seemed out of place in the humid Virginia air, and leaned lightly on a simple wooden cane. He didn't look at the lieutenant, he just looked at the ship. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again," Vance said, her voice rising in pitch. She took a step closer, positioning herself squarely between the man and the gangway. "This is an active naval base. I need to see your authorization, or you need to leave, immediately." The old man, Henry Woolson, finally turned his head. His eyes, a pale and watery blue, seemed to look right through her for a moment before focusing. They held no anger, no fear, just a profound and unsettling weariness. He moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. The crowd of sailors and civilian contractors flowing up and down the pier began to thin, a small bubble of space forming around the confrontation. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Henry produced a worn leather wallet and extracted an old identification card. It was a military ID, but one from a bygone era, the photograph showing a young man with a confident grin, his hair cut high and tight. He offered it to the lieutenant. Vance took it with 2 fingers, as if handling a museum artifact she feared might crumble. She glanced at it, then back at Henry, a smirk playing on her lips. "Henry Woolson," she read aloud, her tone dripping with condescension. She flipped the card over. "Sir, this thing expired 50 years ago. This isn't a pass to get you on the most advanced warship in the world. This is a souvenir." She tried to hand it back, but Henry didn't take it. His eyes had drifted back to the ship. "The Enterprise," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was almost lost in the sea breeze. "She's bigger than I remember." "This is the CVN-80, Vance snapped, her patience gone. "The ship you're thinking of was probably scrapped before I was born. Now I've been polite. It's time for you to go. This isn't a tourist attraction for nostalgic civilians." The small crowd was growing now. Young sailors, fresh out of boot camp, watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. A few dock workers paused, their faces grim. The scene felt wrong. The lieutenant's crisp, unyielding authority was like a hammer against the old man's quiet, unmovable dignity. Her voice was loud, his was soft, her posture was rigid, his was relaxed. "I was told I could come aboard," Henry said, his gaze still distant. "I received a letter." "A letter?" Vance scoffed, crossing her arms. "Did it come by Pony Express?" "Sir, the Admiral himself couldn't get on this ship without the proper current credentials. You are creating a security situation." She unclipped the radio from her belt. Her voice became colder, more official. "I'm going to have you escorted from the premises. This is your final warning." Henry's calm finally seemed to crack, but only for an instant. A flicker of something, sadness, maybe frustration, crossed his face. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and spotted with age, resting on the polished head of his cane. "I just wanted to see her one last time," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Vance's thumb hovered over the transmit button on her radio. Her eyes narrowed, performing a final dismissive scan of the old man. They landed on a small faded patch sewn onto the sleeve of his leather jacket. It was a circular emblem, the threads frayed and the colors bleached by decades of sun. It depicted a bird of prey in a steep dive. "What's this even supposed to be?" she asked, a note of genuine, mocking curiosity in her voice. She reached out and flicked the patch with her finger. Some kind of old biker gang. The touch was light, almost incidental, but it was like a key turning in a lock deep inside Henry's memory. The noisy pier, the smell of salt and diesel, the hard face of the lieutenant, it all dissolved in a roar of sound and a flash of light. The world was vibrating, the air thick with the smell of cordite and hot oil. He was 20 years old again, strapped tightly into the cockpit of a dauntless dive bomber. The same patch, its colors vibrant and new, was on the sleeve of his flight suit. Below him, through the canopy, the vast blue of the Pacific was dotted with the white wakes of warships. His squadron was peeling off, one by one, into a near vertical dive. The scream of the wind mixed with the percussive thumps of anti-aircraft fire, puffing into black clouds around him. His knuckles were white on the stick. His eyes, young and sharp, were fixed on the deck of a Japanese carrier, the Hinamaru, a blood-red circle on its flight deck. He was no longer Henry Woolson, the old man. He was Ensign Hawk Woolson of Scouting Squadron 6, and he was about to make history. The vision lasted only a second. He blinked, and the pier solidified around him once more. The lieutenant was still there, her hand dropping from his sleeve, her expression impatient. Henry's gaze fell to the patch she had touched. He said nothing, simply raised his own weathered hand, and gently, almost reverently, laid his fingers over the worn fabric. The gesture was full of a meaning she could never comprehend. In the small crowd of onlookers, Chief Petty Officer Miller watched, his jaw tight. A 30-year man with a face like a friendly bulldog, Miller had seen his share of arrogant young officers and stubborn old veterans. But this felt different. He saw the way the old man carried himself. He saw the patch on his sleeve. He didn't recognize the specific insignia, but he recognized what it represented, a piece of a past that demanded respect, not ridicule. He watched as Lieutenant Vance finally lost her temper. "That's it. I'm done with this." She raised her radio to her mouth. "Security to Pier 7. I have an unauthorized civilian, elderly male, refusing to comply with a lawful order. Potential cognitive issues. Requesting escort off base. Repeat, escort off base." Miller's blood ran cold. Cognitive issues. It was a bureaucratic dagger, a way to dismiss the man not just as a trespasser but as mentally unfit. It was a profound insult, a stain that would follow him. He couldn't let that happen. Protocol be damned. Slipping back behind a stack of pallets, out of the lieutenant's line of sight, Miller pulled out his personal cell phone. He couldn't countermand a lieutenant's order directly, but he knew people who could. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for the administrative aide to the commander of the entire Atlantic Fleet. It was a long shot, a massive overstep of the chain of command, but his gut screamed at him to make the call. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Commander's office, Petty Officer Davis speaking." "Davis, it's Chief Miller down at Pier 7, he said, keeping his voice low. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am, but we've got a situation down here." "A situation, Chief?" "Yes, ma'am. There's a young Lieutenant Vance. She's about to have an old veteran forcibly removed from the pier. He's trying to see the Enterprise." Miller took a breath. "She's saying he has cognitive issues." "Ma'am, he's as lucid as you or me. He's just old. He says his name is Henry Woolson. He spelled it out. Woolson. He's wearing an old flight jacket with a dive bomber patch on it." I think this is a mistake. A big one." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of a muffled voice followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Miller." The aide's voice was suddenly tense, urgent. "Stay where you are. Do not let that man leave the pier. Do you understand me? Intervene if you have to. The Admiral is on his way." The call ended. Miller stared at his phone, a cold dread mixing with a sense of vindication. The Admiral, for an old man at a checkpoint. Just who in the hell was Henry Woolson? Inside the sprawling headquarters building overlooking the naval base, the atmosphere was one of controlled chaos. Rear Admiral Davies, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a scowl of intense concentration, was in the middle of a high-level briefing on fleet readiness when his aide, a sharp-eyed commander, burst into the conference room without knocking. "Admiral, you need to take this," she said, her voice tight with an urgency that silenced the room. She held a phone out to him. Davies fixed her with a glare that could melt paint. "Commander, whatever it is, it can wait." "Sir, with all due respect, it cannot," she insisted, standing her ground. "It's Chief Miller from Pier 7. There's a lieutenant down there. She's in the process of detaining an elderly civilian." "Sir, the man's name is Henry Woolson." The name hung in the air for a moment. The scowl on Admiral Davies' Hennon's face didn't just vanish. It was replaced by a look of stunned, absolute disbelief. The other officers in the room exchanged confused glances. Davies slowly took the phone. His eyes, which had been focused on logistical charts and deployment schedules, now seemed to be looking back through time. "Woolson," he said into the phone, his voice suddenly a low rumble. "Henry Hawk Woolson." He listened for a moment, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped back loudly against the polished floor. "Keep him there, Chief," the Admiral commanded, his voice now a blade of steel. He tossed the phone back to his aide. "Get my car, now. Tell base security to clear a path to Pier 7. All traffic, stop it. I don't care what it is. Clear the way." He strode out of the room, leaving a wake of bewildered high-ranking officers. The name Henry Woolson meant nothing to most of them, but the Admiral's reaction told them it was the most important name in the world. For the audience in that room, and for the audience of this story, the secret was now out. A legend was being disrespected, and the cavalry was on its way. Back at Pier 7, the two security personnel had arrived in a white golf cart, their expressions a mixture of boredom and reluctance. They were young, barely out of their teens, and looked wholly uncomfortable with the task of manhandling an octogenarian. Lieutenant Vance, however, was now fully committed, her authority having been publicly challenged. The arrival of the security cart was her vindication. "All right, that's enough of this circus," she announced, gesturing to the security guards. "Gentlemen, please escort this man to the main gate. We'll process him there. Frankly, I think he's confused. He might need a medical evaluation to make sure he's safe." The threat was the final cruel overreach. She wasn't just removing him. She was actively trying to strip him of his autonomy, to label him as incompetent, a ward of the state. Henry's shoulders sagged, the fight finally seeming to drain out of him. He looked past the unyielding lieutenant, past the gawking crowd, to the towering gray island of the new Enterprise. A profound melancholy settled in his pale blue eyes. I wanted to say goodbye," he whispered, the words carrying a weight of finality that no one there could understand. He'd said goodbye to the first Enterprise when it was sunk, and to the second when it was scrapped. This new one, carrying the hallowed name, felt like the last link to a life he'd lived, a world he'd helped to save. Just as one of the young security guards took a hesitant step toward him, a sound cut through the air. It wasn't a police siren, but the distinct commanding chirp of a VIP escort. Heads swiveled towards the landward end of the pier. A gleaming black sedan, the flags of a flag officer fluttering from its front fenders, was barreling towards them, followed closely by two imposing black SUVs. They didn't slow, they sped, scattering sailors and workers who leaped out of the way. The convoy screeched to a halt just feet from the scene, the sudden silence more shocking than the noise. Every sailor on the pier, including the stunned Lieutenant Vance, snapped instinctively to attention. The crowd, which had been a loose semicircle, parted like the Red Sea. The rear door of the sedan was pushed open from the inside. A polished black shoe hit the asphalt, followed by the razor-creased trouser leg of a service dress white uniform. Admiral Davies emerged, his face a thundercloud of controlled